There are people who wake up every morning to dozens of notifications, yet still feel completely unseen. Messages, likes, group chats, memes, voices constantly moving across glowing screens. And yet, somewhere between scrolling and replying and pretending to stay connected, a strange emptiness quietly grows. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a subtle feeling that nobody truly knows you anymore. You can sit beside people all day and still feel emotionally invisible. You can talk constantly and still feel deeply alone. You can have hundreds of followers and no one to call when your mind becomes heavy at 2 a.m. And maybe the strangest part is this. Humanity has never been more connected technologically, while simultaneously feeling more disconnected psychologically. Tonight, we are going to explore the psychology of loneliness in a hyper-connected world. Not just loneliness as isolation, but loneliness as emotional disconnection. The kind that quietly follows people through crowded cities, glowing screens, office conversations, relationships, and even friendships. Because modern loneliness is no longer just about being physically alone. Sometimes it is about being surrounded, yet emotionally unattached. And somewhere along the way, many adults stopped asking, "Why am I alone?" and started silently wondering, "Why do I feel alone even around other people?" Imagine a subway train late at night. Dozens of people sit inches apart from each other. Blue light from phones reflects softly across tired faces. Someone scrolls through vacation photos. Another watches short videos without sound. Someone else types "I'm fine" into a chat they don't emotionally mean. Nobody speaks. The train moves through the city like a metal container full of private emotional worlds. This is modern loneliness. Not absence of people. Absence of depth. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that modern existence often traps people inside performances. We begin acting versions of ourselves designed for social survival instead of genuine connection. And social media amplified this dramatically. Today, people often know each other's highlights, but not each other's fears. We know what people consume, where they travel, what songs they play, what aesthetic they curate. But we rarely know what keeps them awake at night. We have created a culture of constant visibility, without emotional intimacy. And the human nervous system quietly suffers because of it. Loneliness is not merely physical isolation. Psychologically, loneliness is the feeling that meaningful emotional connection is absent. A person can live alone peacefully without loneliness. Another can be surrounded constantly and still feel emotionally starving. Because the mind does not only need stimulation, it needs resonance. The feeling of being emotionally understood. And that is becoming increasingly rare. Modern life rewards performance over presence. People are encouraged to stay productive, efficient, entertaining, interesting, optimized. But genuine connection requires something slower. Vulnerability, attention, emotional risk, silence, time. And these qualities are slowly disappearing from daily life. Think about how conversations happen now. Someone speaks while the other person checks notifications. Friends meet while half attending to phones. People reply quickly but rarely deeply. We became accessible to everyone while emotionally available to almost no one. And over time, the nervous system begins interpreting this emotional fragmentation as loneliness. There is another hidden layer to this. Many people are no longer lonely because nobody exists around them. They are lonely because they no longer feel safe being emotionally honest. Modern culture quietly teaches people to market themselves socially, to appear attractive, successful, interesting, emotionally composed. So people slowly stop revealing their real inner world. Instead, they present edited emotional versions of themselves. And the terrifying consequence is this. The more performative a person becomes, the harder genuine intimacy feels. Because intimacy requires being seen without performance. Carl Jung believed that many psychological problems emerge when people become disconnected from their authentic selves. And hyperconnected culture often accelerates this disconnection. You begin comparing your unfiltered inner life to everyone else's curated outer life. And comparison slowly poisons emotional stability. A person opens social media while sitting alone in bed. Suddenly they see friends traveling, couples laughing, someone building a successful career, someone glowing physically, someone constantly surrounded by people. And subconsciously the mind creates a distorted conclusion. Everyone else seems connected. Why do I feel emotionally behind? But social media rarely shows emotional truth. It shows emotional theater. A smiling photo never reveals the panic attack afterward. A romantic picture never reveals emotional distance. Success posts never reveal burnout. Funny videos never reveal loneliness after midnight. Yet the brain still compares constantly. And comparison creates emotional alienation. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard described despair as becoming separated from one's true self. In many ways, modern loneliness is exactly this. People lose contact not only with others, but with themselves. They stop asking what they genuinely feel, what they genuinely value, what kind of life genuinely nourishes them. Instead, they become psychologically shaped by algorithms. Attention becomes fragmented, identity becomes performative, relationships become transactional. And the human nervous system begins starving for depth in a world obsessed with stimulation. One of the strangest psychological effects of hyperconnectivity is the illusion of social fulfillment. A person may spend hours interacting digitally and still remain emotionally empty afterward. Why? Because stimulation and connection are not the same thing. Scrolling gives stimulation, validation gives stimulation, notifications give stimulation. But emotional connection requires co-regulation. Eye contact, presence, trust, shared vulnerability, feeling psychologically safe with another human being. The nervous system evolved for relational depth, not endless digital exposure. Imagine eating candy all day instead of real meals. Eventually, the body becomes nutritionally empty, despite constant consumption. Modern loneliness functions similarly. People consume endless social stimulation while remaining emotionally undernourished. This explains why silence feels increasingly uncomfortable for many adults. The moment quiet appears, people instinctively reach for stimulation. Phone, music, videos, podcasts, messages. Anything to avoid sitting alone with their own thoughts. But loneliness deepens when people lose the ability to emotionally accompany themselves. Many adults are not only disconnected from others, they are disconnected from their own inner world. And this creates another painful cycle. The more disconnected people feel internally, the more desperately they seek external validation. Likes become emotional reassurance. Replies become emotional confirmation. Attention becomes temporary relief. But external validation cannot permanently resolve internal emptiness. It only briefly distracts from it. And eventually people experience something deeply modern. Being constantly stimulated, yet emotionally numb. This is why many people feel exhausted after hours online. Not because interaction itself is harmful, but because fragmented attention drains psychological energy. The human mind was not designed to emotionally process thousands of people continuously. For most of human history, relationships were smaller, slower, deeper. Today, people absorb endless opinions, comparisons, conflicts, and emotional noise daily. The nervous system never fully rests, and emotional exhaustion quietly transforms into loneliness. There is another uncomfortable truth hiding beneath all this. Technology increased communication, but it also increased avoidance. Many people now avoid difficult emotional conversations entirely. Instead of saying, "I feel hurt," they disappear quietly, ghosting. Instead of vulnerability, people send vague signals. indirect messages, half-truths. Because emotional honesty now feels terrifyingly exposed. And over time, relationships become emotionally shallow because people fear genuine vulnerability. But loneliness cannot disappear without vulnerability. Connection requires emotional risk. The risk of being misunderstood, rejected, seen clearly. And modern culture simultaneously craves intimacy while fearing exposure. This contradiction creates enormous psychological tension. Now let's go deeper. There are 3 psychological forces silently shaping loneliness in modern adulthood. The first is what psychologists call social comparison distortion. Humans naturally compare themselves to others for survival and belonging. But social media created infinite comparison. Not local comparison, global comparison. Your brain now compares your ordinary Tuesday afternoon to the highlight reels of thousands of people simultaneously. And this creates chronic inadequacy. People begin feeling emotionally defective simply because they are comparing real life to curated illusion. The second force is fragmented identity. Many adults behave differently across every environment. Professional self, online self, family self, romantic self, private self. Over time, identity becomes psychologically scattered. And when a person no longer knows which version of themselves is real, loneliness intensifies. Because authentic connection requires authenticity first. The third force is emotional substitution. People substitute genuine intimacy with temporary emotional distractions. Endless scrolling instead of reflection. Casual validation instead of meaningful connection. Parasocial attachment instead of reciprocal relationships. And while these things temporarily soothe discomfort, they rarely satisfy deeper emotional needs. This is why many people feel strangely empty after hours online. The mind consumed stimulation, but the soul remained untouched. Philosophically, loneliness also reveals something important about modern civilization. We built systems optimized for efficiency, not meaning. People move quickly, work constantly, consume endlessly, but many rarely pause long enough to ask, what actually makes me feel deeply alive? Meaningful connection requires slowness, and slowness now feels unnatural. Even conversations are rushed. Silence becomes awkward, depth becomes inconvenient, attention becomes fragmented. Yet human beings psychologically heal through attuned presence. Not speed, not performance, presence. There is a Japanese concept called ma. It refers to meaningful emptiness, the silence between sounds, the pause that gives moments emotional depth. Modern life eliminated much of this psychological space. People constantly consume information to avoid emptiness. But emotional clarity often emerges precisely inside stillness. And this brings us to something essential. Loneliness is not always an enemy. Sometimes loneliness is an invitation. An invitation to reconnect with parts of yourself buried beneath noise, distraction, comparison, and performance. Some of the deepest transformations in human history emerged through solitude. Philosophers, artists, writers, thinkers. Not because isolation itself is magical, but because silence reveals what distraction hides. The problem is not solitude. The problem is emotional disconnection without awareness. There is a difference between healthy solitude and painful loneliness. Solitude nourishes, loneliness depletes. Solitude reconnects you with yourself, loneliness disconnects you from meaning. And many adults unknowingly oscillate between the two without understanding either. Now let's move towards something practical. How do you reduce loneliness in a world designed to fragment attention and emotional depth? The first step is rebuilding presence. Not productivity, presence. Begin noticing how often you divide your attention during conversations. How often you consume instead of connect. Practice giving people undivided attention again. Eye contact, stillness, listening without waiting to respond. These small shifts rebuild emotional intimacy slowly. The second step is reducing performative living. Ask yourself honestly, how much of my life is shaped by external perception? What do you genuinely enjoy when nobody is? What thoughts do you suppress because they do not fit your public image? Loneliness decreases when authenticity increases, because real connection becomes possible only when the real self appears. The third step is rebuilding tolerance for solitude. This is extremely important. Many people fear solitude because silence reveals unresolved emotions. But emotional maturity requires learning to sit with yourself without constant distraction. Go on walks without headphones sometimes. Sit quietly without immediately reaching for stimulation. Journal honestly. Notice your internal world. At first, this may feel uncomfortable, because stillness initially exposes emotional noise hidden beneath distraction. But eventually, stillness becomes clarity. The fourth step is prioritizing fewer but deeper relationships. Modern culture encourages quantity. More followers, more connections, more interactions. But psychologically, depth matters more than volume. A few emotionally safe relationships nourish the nervous system more deeply than endless shallow interactions. One genuine conversation can psychologically heal more than weeks of digital stimulation. The fifth step is practicing emotional honesty gradually. You do not need to reveal your soul to everyone, but allow trusted people to see more of your real emotional experience. Not only achievements, not only humor, not only competence. Also uncertainty, fear, sadness, confusion. Vulnerability creates resonance, and resonance dissolves loneliness. The sixth step is reclaiming meaning outside digital validation. Create things privately, read deeply, spend time in nature, learn slowly, engage with life experiences that exist independently from audience approval. Because the more your identity depends on external attention, the more emotionally unstable connection becomes. There is another subtle truth many people discover too late. Loneliness often grows when people abandon themselves trying to belong. They silence opinions, hide emotions, perform socially acceptable versions of themselves. And eventually they become socially accepted, but internally unknown, which creates a devastating emotional paradox. People may love the version of you that is performing, while never truly knowing you. And the human heart eventually grows exhausted from being emotionally unseen. This is why authenticity feels psychologically relieving. Not because everyone will understand you, but because internal fragmentation decreases. Your inner world and outer world become aligned again. And alignment creates peace. Imagine a man sitting alone beside the ocean at sunrise. No music, no notifications, no audience. Just waves moving endlessly toward shore. For the first time in years, he is not distracting himself. At first, the silence feels unbearable. Then memories emerge, thoughts, regrets, questions. But eventually something unexpected happens. The loneliness softens, not because someone arrived to rescue him, but because he finally stopped abandoning himself internally. Modern loneliness is not solved only by finding more people. Sometimes it begins healing the moment you return honestly to yourself. Because when people become emotionally present with themselves, they become capable of genuine presence with others too. And maybe that is the deeper tragedy of hyper-connected life. Not that people lack communication, but that they rarely experience true emotional presence anymore. Yet presence remains available. In quiet conversations, in honest friendships, in moments of stillness, in shared silence without performance. And perhaps healing begins when people stop asking, "How do I become less lonely?" and begin asking, "How do I become more emotionally real?" Because connection grows naturally wherever authenticity survives. And in a world overflowing with noise, performance, comparison, and distraction, Authenticity becomes a kind of rebellion. A slow, quiet rebellion against emotional emptiness. Maybe that is why the most meaningful human moments still feel strangely simple. A deep conversation at night, someone listening fully, walking beside another person without needing to perform, being understood without pretending. Not stimulation, not algorithms, just presence. And perhaps that is what the human nervous system has been searching for all along. Not endless connection, but genuine connection.